Book nibbles. Big ideas, small bites. If you took modern American politics and asked what felt deepest, not just in platforms or policies, but in people's hearts, you would find identity. Lilliana Mason opens by describing a shift so gradual that many hardly noticed until it had transformed the political landscape. Party labels are no longer just shorthand for policy preferences. They have become super identities, fused with race, religion, geography, social class, culture. It's no longer surprise that where someone lives, what church they attend or don't, what schooling they got, or whom they associate with socially tends to line up, almost mechanically, with party membership. This alignment, what Mason calls social sorting, does more than map affiliations. It shapes how we feel, how we judge, whom we trust, and how we even define ourselves and others. Mason traces the rise of social sorting through old surveys, evolving social norms, and experiments. Early on, she reminds us that decades ago, identities like race, religion, region, or class often cut across political affiliations. You could be religiously conservative yet vote Democratic, or be affluent but also socially liberal, etc. But over time, those cross pressures have weakened as social groups became more homogenous in their politics. As the identities lined up, white evangelicals more overwhelmingly Republican, people with postgraduate education more reliably Democratic. The sense of belonging to a party ceased to be just choice and became more like belonging to a tribe. One example she cites, survey data showing that people in certain geographic areas, say suburbs or particular states, became more reliably one party, so neighbors, co-workers, and social friends increasingly shared party identity. The parties themselves began to carry social meanings beyond policy, voting behavior, conversation topics, even cultural taste. With this social alignment came new emotional stakes. It's no longer sufficient for someone to disagree with a policy. To disagree is to be one of them, or, worse, to betray your own side. Mason uses experiments and survey panels to show that when someone insults a party or its members, not merely the party's policies, people feel more anger, more threat, more rejection. In an experiment she describes, participants read statements framed as criticism either of party policy or of the party as a group. The attacks on identity generate stronger anger, more intensity, than attacks on policy alone. What had once been ideological disagreement shifted toward emotional conflict. Warmth toward one's party grew, coldness toward the other increased. Over time, people's feelings of dislike, distrust, even disgust for the other party added up, not because of policy per se, but because identity made the other a kind of outgroup. Mason doesn't stop with prejudice. She shows that these identity-based divisions shape activism, choice, social life. Voting becomes less a matter of issue alignment, more of loyalty, of showing up for the side. She demonstrates that higher levels of social sorting are associated with greater partisanship, greater emotional response, more activism, but also less flexibility. People sorted into strong identity groups are less likely to cross over, less likely to change their vote when policies shift, less likely to compromise. She illustrates this with survey data where highly sorted individuals, those whose social identity markers align with their party, express strong activism even if their own issue preferences don't always align perfectly with their party's platform. The party becomes a package deal. Pick the identity and you pick the rest. One vivid thread is partisan prejudice in daily life. Whom we socialize with, who we date, what books or media we consume, even which grocery stores or neighborhoods we feel comfortable in tends to be colored by party signals. Mason presents data from large-scale surveys, the American National Election Studies, etc., showing that over time, respondents report that warm feelings toward one's own party and cool feelings toward the opposing party have diverged steadily. Not just policy disagreement, but social distance, how willing one is to associate socially without partisans. Choices of friends, marriage partners, neighbors all become filtered through party identity. When identities are sorted, these personal and social behaviors shift alongside political behavior. Mason also addresses the emotional intensity. Why people feel enraged when their side loses, why political victories can become sources of joy unlike mere policy wins, why losses feel like betrayals. She examines experiments where partisans are exposed to statements purportedly criticizing their party or the opposing party. She tracks emotional responses. Criticism of identity triggers more anger than criticism of issues. Criticism of out-party identity triggers more anger even when the out-party is being assessed on policy. The sense of someone attacking us is felt more viscerally than someone criticizing what we believe in abstract. In addition, strong identities amplify emotional responses. Losses hurt more. Wins feel more uplifting. Disasters for the party feel like catastrophes for the self. Mason also highlights how activism shifts under these conditions. Not all activism is the product of issue conviction. Much of it flows from identity protection and in the name of defending or promoting the group. When someone perceives threat, say that the other party is trying to take away rights or that culture is under siege, people act. But those acts are less likely to spring from nuanced analysis and more from emotional cues, partisan loyalty, and identity conflict. This leads to misperceptions, oversimplified narratives, demonization of the other side, and political behavior less responsive to changes on the ground. Mason carefully shows with data how people whose social identities align tightly with their party are more resistant to changing their views, even when new evidence emerges, because change feels like betrayal or identity threat. Though this identity sorting produces high engagement and high stakes, Mason argues it has costs. Democracy depends on compromise, on deliberation, on seeing opponents not as enemies, but possibly misguided peers. When most of politics becomes identity, even issues that could be negotiated become polarized. Where before people might have been cross-pressured, torn between, say, their religion and their party or their class and their party, those pressures fade. Cross-pressured individuals, Mason shows, tend to have lower emotional partisanship, more flexibility. But as identity sorting increases, fewer people are cross-pressured. Identities become more aligned, reducing spaces where identity conflicts could moderate behavior. Mason considers what might restore flexibility or reduce the corrosive effects. She discusses norms, exposure, structural changes. For instance, social norms around respect for opponents, or norms of seeing politics as one domain among many rather than the defining domain. She discusses how institutions, electoral systems, geographic sorting, residential segregation by party or identity, media environments, and elite behavior reinforce sorting. Elite cues matter. When party leaders demonize opponents, when rhetoric emphasizes identity threats, when campaign messaging uses moralized language, it fuels sorting and animosity. Media segmentation, people choosing media sources that conform with their identity/party, further sharpens echo chambers, reducing exposure to countervailing views and reinforcing emotional reactions. Mason offers stimuli from experiments and surveys to show what reduces some of the worst effects, though she is cautious about how easy change is. In one experiment, exposure to statements highlighting similarities between parties or cross-cutting identities dampens emotional responses. In another, when people learn that the opposing party's members share some moral or cultural norms or see out partisans as less threatening, effective polarization decreases somewhat. She suggests that interventions aimed at reducing prejudice or social distance might help, but only if they tackle identity alignment deeply: race, religion, class, geography. Simple policy messaging alone won't suffice because much conflict is social, not ideological. As she draws toward conclusion, Mason warns that if sorting continues unchecked, the democratic experiment may suffer. When the identity of being Republican or Democrat becomes a mega identity tying together social, cultural, moral, symbolic dimensions, then elections become zero-sum fights. Winning becomes everything, policies matter less than triumph, behavior of the other side becomes dehumanized, political institutions lose legitimacy. The bar for compromise rises or becomes impossible. Citizens stop trusting the other side, believing they are not just wrong but immoral. Discourse becomes polarized, not just disagreement, but antagonism, stigmatization, threat. And that threatens governance, civil peace, effectiveness of democracy. Mason ends with a measured set of questions. Can we shift identity alignment? Can we build cross-cutting affiliations, identities that overlap in surprising ways so party identity isn't everything? Can norms of civility, empathy, respect be restored? Can elite cues and media framing be changed to reduce threat rhetoric? She acknowledges the difficulties. Identity is sticky. Many people want the psychological and social comfort of belonging, but she suggests that even small moves, norms, exposure, reframing, political leadership might reduce the us versus them dynamics that corrode civic life. What emerges from Uncivil Agreement is both diagnosis and warning. The disease is social sorting amplifying partisan identity. The symptoms are prejudice, emotional intensity, rigidity, identity-based activism, social distance. The medicine is uncertain but lies in exposure, empathy, elite behavior, norms. Mason leaves us unsettled. This sorting is already very far along. Reversing it will require deep structural and cultural work. Yet she provides enough evidence and examples to help us see that a different path, one where identities are multiple, where politics is one domain among many, where opponents are fellow citizens, not enemies, is possible, though difficult. If one were to pull out lessons or key takeaways from the book in practical form, they might include: be aware of how your social identity markers, religion, race, class, geography, education, may align with your political identity, and how that alignment can shape emotion and judgment beyond policy. Notice when disagreement is taken as identity threat rather than policy debate. Challenge that frame. Seek out cross-cutting social ties, friends, acquaintances, media, neighborhoods that do not match your party label strictly. These are buffers against identity polarization. Hold fast to norms of respect, even when disagreeing. Avoid moralizing opponents. Avoid demonizing rhetoric. Encourage public/institutional leadership, media, political institutions, parties to emphasize shared identities or values to reduce us versus them framing. Recognize that simple persuasion on policy alone will often fail if identity alignment and emotional investment are high. Emotional and identity dimensions need attending. In sum, Uncivil Agreement offers a rigorous, empirically grounded diagnosis of how American politics has moved from argument over issues toward fight over identity, exploring the tangible consequences in feelings, social relations, political behavior, and democratic norms. It's not an easy read. It demands that we see complicity, that we see how much of our behavior is shaped by identity, often unconsciously, and that the consequences are serious. Yet it also offers glimpses of what might soften the sharpening edges. For readers interested in democracy, social psychology, or how politics shapes and is shaped by our daily lives, it's a clarifying, sobering, essential book. And that's it. Uncivil Agreement: How Politics Became Our Identity by Lilliana Mason. Thanks for listening to Book Nibbles. If you enjoyed this bite-sized book, don't forget to subscribe for more quick, insightful summaries. See you in the next nibble.